Hello, hello. Welcome to the US Architecture and Design Market Report discussion. I'm here with Alistair Wallace and James Boggin of Bespoke Careers. Really excited to be going through the findings, guys, and seeing where we're at as an industry. How are you both doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, very well, thanks, Micah. Very well.
Nice. Well, we really appreciate your time, and I don't want to waste it. So, how about we just get straight into it? I've started the other two conversations by just getting a general update on the market. Alistair, you're looking after New York and California. How have things been
Mhm.
in the last 12 months, market wise?
It's been an interesting 12 months, I will say that. It's continued on, I guess, from the previous 12 months, which was um, one of kind of cautious optimism around what's just around the corner. A lot of um, people hanging on for projects to move forward. Um, and that, like I said, continued into this year and impacted, obviously, on people's decisions around hiring. Um, so it's still cautiously optimistic. That's maybe tempered with um, a kind of heightened awareness around the economic background to everything here in the US.
And how about you, James? Does that sound similar to what's emerging in Texas or has been emerging?
Yeah, very similar, really. It feels like we're in a kind of a similar situation to we were last year. We're sort of leading up to the election. There was a lot of cautious optimism, and honestly, it hasn't really changed. We were expecting the market to have picked up a little bit by now, but political climate, economic climate means that hasn't really happened. There's still a lot of big healthcare projects, data center work, some education work, but the developer work is still pretty slow, and projects waiting to start again.
Yeah, well, we've certainly seen an uptick here in the UK in the last, well, really since mid-Feb. Things have really been looking quite positively. And I spoke to the team in Australia 2 weeks ago, and they kind of said the same. So historically, they've kind of the three markets have sort of relatively closely followed each other. So maybe we can be optimistic that the US is just a couple of months behind, and we can expect some uptick coming. But who
Yep.
knows? We can stare into the crystal ball all we like, but maybe what we'll do instead is have a look at some of the research from the report. So earlier in the year, we went out to about 1,000 professionals around the world, and we asked them kind of how they're feeling about their salaries, their jobs, well-being, and we've put it all into a report which you can download. The link will be available in the description, and we're just going to go through it slide by slide. So to start with, we looked at job satisfaction. You can see really clearly straight off the bat that Texas is miles ahead of New York and California. But there's an overall positive sentiment everywhere. Just a quick explainer on this and sort of how we get these numbers. Zero would indicate a sort of perfectly neutral sentiment towards the professionals' jobs. Anything below zero is a negative sentiment. So encouraging to see all three states in the positives there. But James, looking good in Texas.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great score. I mean, like I said before, I think there's been sort of consistent work, particularly across institutional projects and large scale projects. Like Texas itself is its own country in many ways, with four major cities, um, and Dallas in particular has stayed really busy. But in terms of kind of job satisfaction, I guess they're linked. You know, if people are busy, the projects are interesting, um, then there'll be more satisfaction with their work.
Mm. Alistair, New York, California. Any surprises there?
No, I don't think so. I think, there has been a kind of push or an emphasis from firms in the last 12 months around um, talent retention. So with firms focusing on talent retention, I'm sure they are doing everything they can to keep everybody happy that they have in their team. So there's no real surprise that leads to a sense of satisfaction in both California and New York.
Mm. Well, we talk about the slightly dreary market picture, but on a positive note, this score here, the US overall of plus 34, was the highest of the three regions we studied. So it came in above Australia and the UK. So yeah, US design professionals feeling pretty satisfied with things overall, which is great to see. And we can move it on to salary increase. Now, again, this was the highest of the three regions. The US overall rise, 5.14%. There wasn't a whole lot in it, really. Texas with a slightly smaller increase than New York and California. But it seems like we've seen a slight slowdown after the post-COVID boom. Does that sound about right, James?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, as we know, salaries in the US are relatively higher than the UK and Australia. There's a bit of what I would say is there's a bit of a shortage of talent, and so firms are willing to pay a little bit more to get the right talent. And I mean, it's fairly small, probably just above current inflation. But it seems about right to me.
Business support roles, they came in with a
Mm.
slightly higher than average. I think they were sitting more like 7.5% was the average rise in those roles. Why do you think it is that firms are willing to pay a little bit more for those professionals?
I think there is. It comes down to simple thing of it's a specialist role a lot of the time. You're talking about, marketing professionals, you're talking about HR professionals or finance professionals who are certainly ones we see have years of experience at firms. And it's a smaller pool of candidates. So when you are fighting for that kind of competition, it's always going to be more intense. And as a result, I guess salary increases, you're likely to see higher salary increases as a result of that. So I think that does make sense for those particular roles. Unfortunately, the majority of firms or the majority of employees at a firm are architecture and design, so they're non-business support roles. So there is less um, there's less of a niche to them. There's more candidates and more job seekers available for those broader roles in a sense.
I would say just on that point as well that we've certainly noticed an increase in the demand for marketing and business development professionals in Texas. And I think as more firms move into Texas and the competition increases, those are the candidates that can really sort of increase top line growth. And so they, in many ways, firms can justify increased salary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this is true or whether you agree with this, but I tend to see kind of increased hiring with the business support roles as kind of an indication of a returning market confidence. I think when firms are willing to invest in those back office support staff, it shows that they're feeling good about where they're at. Would you agree with that, James?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. They're usually one of the first roles or the first kind of jobs to be let go when the market's not doing so well, like non-fee earning roles. And so if they're hiring them again and if the demand for hiring them has increased, then it would suggest an increased confidence in the market.
Yeah, cool. So we'll move on to salary satisfaction, and this one, I was really pleased to see this, and this was consistent across Australia, UK, and the US. Unfortunately, you can see New York lagging a little bit, but the picture was a massive return to well, it's a neutral sentiment really, but it seems positive considering in 2021 pandemic times we were in the trenches really in terms of salary satisfaction. So a really encouraging sign for the industry that people are feeling better about their paychecks.
Yeah, I think I was interested to see these results. I would have thought California and New York might have had a similar kind of sentiment around salary satisfaction. The reason that I might kind of think that New York's satisfaction is actually decreased is more to do with kind of the high cost of living in New York, um, perhaps outstripping the wage increases that we were just talking about. Um, However, I would have thought that would have been a similar sentiment in California as well. Um, so it's a difficult one to unpick, I guess. Um, but yeah, I put it down to um, New York's high cost of living, um, and the pressures that people are feeling in the city around that.
Mm. Yeah, I don't have the data of where New York was specifically back in 2021, but I think they were even further below the national average. So, yeah, it's easy to look at this graph on the right and say, um, it's a droll picture in New York, but actually the growth has been consistent across the three states. James, again, Texas topping things out there, salary satisfaction wise.
Yeah, I mean, it feels as though salaries in Texas are almost catching up to California and New York, despite the cost of living not being anywhere near as high. So I'm not super surprised by that score. I mean, also, as I mentioned previously, Texas is almost like its own country in many ways. You've got Dallas, which has kind of typically lower cost of living to Austin, even though salaries remain fairly consistent between the two. Um, so yeah, I'm not that surprised. It's great that people are satisfied with their salaries, but I'm not overly surprised.
Yeah, and we'll see a little bit later about salaries and how they impact candidates in terms of moving jobs and where that falls on the priority list. But before that, we'll look at the gender pay gap. So, yeah, it's always a difficult conversation, this one. But we can take a little bit of encouragement from the fact that we're improving. This is a figure that's improving. So it's 8.7 percent is the current gap. That's how much more men earn than women in the industry. But for context, the Australian gap is 20.6%. So more than double, or more than half that, I should say. And we are a little bit higher in the States than the UK, which came in at, I think it was 7.6%. So yeah, what can we make of this, Alistair?
I mean, I guess first thing to say is it's disappointing to see that there is still this gender pay gap. I think um, the the fact that it's closer here than perhaps some of our other regions is um, encouraging. Uh, I think you probably put that down to the fact that there has been a big focus on equity for a number of years now, and firms um, are taking the the measures to both review and adjust salaries based on all sorts of data that they get around their staff. So it's trending in the right direction, but there's still a way to go.
Yeah, and actually, you can see that the New York gap of 6.6% and California 5.8% is better than, in fact, the UK, but Texas dragging things down at 19%.
One interesting point to make is that in both New York and California, there are um, salary transparency laws in place around when you're advertising a role, which has been in place for a number of years now and has probably helped this shift that we've seen in both of those states to close the gap at least. Um, and I'm not sure if Texas actually has the same laws.
No, we don't have the same law. So that's an interesting point. Also, I wonder if that's something that will be implemented at some stage, and if so, whether that will help close the gap.
Yeah, I think part of our job at Bespoke is to try and tackle these issues head on. Our global salary guide is a great way that we kind of can open up the transparency of salaries, and that it's a really popular asset that's used across the US and indeed Australia and the UK as well. And conversations like these, reports like these, where we can kind of just shine a light on it, and like I said, things are looking better than they were in the US. So, and a lot of it's down to the representation as well. So it's, women are never going to earn as much as men as long as they're not getting promoted into the leadership roles. Women occupy just under 42% of the leadership roles, which again was much better than the Australia and slightly behind the UK. and a relatively even split between Texas, California, and New York. You can see there Texas have the most men in leadership positions, and New York have the fewest. But yeah, I think this slide here sort of is fairly representative of what we saw on the last slide. But in terms of hiring, Alistair, a firm's kind of putting in place plans to see their women kind of celebrated and brought into those leadership positions. What are firms doing in this space?
For some firms, they are recognizing a need to mentor young women in their firms to bring them up through the ranks into leadership positions. Tends to be firms at the larger size who have the resources, motivation, whatever it might be, to put these kind of plans in place to do that type of thing. And I think we need to see more of it. Then you've got the likes of the AIA. They have the Women in Architecture groups, mentoring groups in amongst that, which I think is a great resource for anybody who's not in those large firms that have those mentorships in place. So there are things happening at large firms, medium-sized firms, or at kind of AIA level, which I think could help and are helping with some of these things.
Great. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on this, obviously, and we'll bring you the results in 2026, and hopefully we'll see that gap close further. A word on contractors. This number's been slowly creeping up. 5.4% of the architecture and design workforce in the US work in contract roles. James, why do you think it is that firms? What's the advantage of hiring a contractor from a firm's perspective in architecture and design?
So by hiring a contractor, you can have someone start usually within a week. Typical time to hire depends on the level of the role, but for a permanent position, could be anything from sort of 4 weeks to 2 months, 3 months. In that time, so much can change, but hiring a contractor will address a quick need, particularly if you need help with production or meeting a deadline. So there are various benefits. Also, you don't have to get someone on to your payroll, and you don't have to offer some of the other benefits of a full-time employee. So it's a really flexible option for an industry that relies on deadlines and project work. So yeah, there are a few of the benefits.
Yeah, and at Bespoke, we can help you with hiring contractors. Alistair, do you want to share a word on how that works?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. We have contractors that we work with who are who have niche skills a lot of the time. They might be specialists at BIM software, Revit, computational design, that type of thing, or simply just really good at kind of production that can help push a project through a hard deadline. So what we're able to do is provide that contractor for a defined period of time to help you with that project pressure. We take care of everything employment-wise, and they just love their hours that they work, and you pay for the hours that they've worked at your firm. So it's a really straightforward process that allows you to upskill or increase the size of your team with that kind of flexibility that it can just be for a matter of days, weeks, or months.
Cool. Sales pitch over. Thank you very much. If you want to know more about hiring a contractor with Bespoke, head to bespokecareers.com. I said I'd talk about it. I found this slide particularly interesting, maybe because it's of my naivety, but I always thought pay was one of the main motivator for architects and designers across the world. But it's sitting there at number 3 behind work-life balance and flexibility. And this is something that pay, I mean, in the 2021 survey that we did, pay increase came in at number 1. So that's fallen back. James, do you want to try and unpack why we've seen that and why work-life balance now is so clearly the most important factor for professionals moving jobs in the US?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, traditionally, architecture has a reputation of not having great work-life balance. Um, and I think some firms have addressed that, and some haven't. Um, we're actually seeing, although there's a sort of general trend of firms moving towards more days in office, I've actually seen the reverse in Texas over the last 12 months. We've had firms going from a flexible model during COVID to fully in office, and now scaling that back to several days at home. I think the main reason for that is that um, they can't attract the level of talent that they're looking for um, by being fully in office, and in a market where there's a real talent shortage. Um, People will move jobs to get greater work-life balance, um, and it's typically from firms that are fully in office to firms that are 1 or 2 days from home, and in that hybrid model. So um, yeah, it's very hard to compete. It's unlikely. We don't see many candidates moving from a hybrid model to a fully in office model. It's typically the other way around. So I'm not super surprised to see that.
Yeah, Alice, did you have anything to add there? Is this kind of reflecting what the conversations you're having with candidates on the daily?
Yeah, I think a little, and I think there's definitely a shift here in New York, certainly that founders are moving to more days in the office, and the result of that has been really interesting. You've got um, you've got I think two things going on. To be an attractive employer, you should offer flexibility. And I think you're always going to be more attractive the more flexibility you're offering around things like hybrid working or work-life balance. However, on the flip side, those that are moving to more days in the office aren't necessarily losing people from their team. So, in terms of retention, those that are moving to more days in the office aren't seeing a huge impact on staff retention, but it will impact their ability to attract new hires. That's for sure. Because as James says, um, when when candidates are looking to move jobs, they're looking to maintain the levels of flexibility they have in their current roles, and with the majority having at least some flexibility. Those that are asking people to be in 5 days are going to really struggle when the emphasis on a good work life balance, and that pretty much translates to a hybrid working arrangement is top of the rankings right now.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes into factor is like things like working overtime. I think our industry's traditionally been one of sort of long hours and burnout. I think candidates are demanding separation from work and life. So yeah, it's the employers that are recognizing this and having slightly more reasonable workloads and things like that. That kind of all sort of falls into this work-life balance, and obviously flexibility. Obvious things like if you need to drop your kids off at school, pick them up, being able to do that and not have to jump through hoops and fill out forms and the rest of it. But we've talked a lot about hybrid working already. A pretty interesting split here. As you can see, it is still the majority of firms are offering some form of hybrid working. But the most common arrangement now is 5 days a week. Nearly half of A&D professionals are working 5 days a week, and we saw 1 in 4 practices in the US increase their office days within the last 12 months. So, I mean, I've had this conversation a couple of times because the pattern's the same in the UK and Australia. And I've spoken to a few employers about this as well, and they've said, this is what we've been wanting to do for a few years. We haven't had the confidence to do it, but maybe as the market's recovering, I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe it's just been enough time now. Employers are starting to find that confidence to bring their employees back in. Lucy pointed out in the UK edition of this that architecture practices and interior design practices, they've spent so much on their offices. They want to see them utilised. But yeah, what do you think of this, James? Does this seem accurate, what you're seeing?
Yeah, so the hybrid working in Texas is higher than California and New York. Yeah, and honestly, it's not surprising. I think there's a bit of a fear from firms in Texas because we're a talent short market. That if they do insist on bringing people back, I think there's a desire by most firms to have people in the office more, but the fear is greater than that desire. So the fear of bringing back people will result in people leaving. Whether that's actually the case or not, don't know. But the fear of bringing people back will force people out, and it'll be very difficult and expensive to replace them. So I'm not surprised that the numbers higher than in California and New York.
Yeah, I think it seems to accurately capture what we're seeing, and I think it's probably important to make a distinction between architecture firms and interior design, like pure interior design companies. The interior designers tend to be in the office more. They need to be in and around materials. I think is a huge part of that. But also that they are they're smaller companies, smaller teams. I think that's why there is a trend in that direction on interiors. So yeah, I think this reflects what we're seeing. The average days in the office is going up. Um, you know, even with the preferred days in the office being less than what is currently shown, I think the market that we were talking about before being kind of cautiously optimistic, but in a sort of slight freeze, means that there aren't, you know, a large number of roles for people to consider as an alternative if you're not that satisfied with your current arrangement. So, um, there has been a power shift, again, alluding to what James was saying, there's kind of a power shift where firms maybe have more confidence here in California and New York, that they can ask people to come in more times per week without the fear, here at least, of people running to other things because other things aren't necessarily available right now.
There's cultural differences as well in the US. So Austin has just generally in Austin, it has I believe, the largest number of hybrid workers in the US. Um, and that's across all industries. So, if people's friends are working hybrid and they see that kind of flexibility and work-life balance that they have, um, then that kind of seeps into all industries. So even if there is a desire by the firms, there's also a desire by the candidates to be what their friends and family are like in other offices. There's also been, the population in Austin and Dallas has increased so much over the last 10 years. The infrastructure hasn't necessarily kept up. So speak to anyone in Austin and Dallas they'll tell you the traffic is 10 times worse than it was. So people's commute has gone up from 20 minutes to an hour and a half. And that's having a real impact. There's no public transport to speak of here in Austin. And so people rely on their cars, and so they're just not willing to spend that much time commuting.
And just a final note on the hybrid working, it was interesting to see the preferences of professionals. So in the US, basically in the US, professionals prefer working from home more than those in Australia and the UK. So 2.76 days per week in the office is what they want, which is a little bit less than what they're getting. But it's somewhere between 3 and 4. I think that's what we're kind of seeing it balancing out, despite firms possibly wanting them in 5 days a week. I'm not sure. I don't think we're going to see a full return to in-office work anytime soon. But we'll keep an eye on this, and again, we'll report back 2026 with how that's developed. Generational workplace trends. I thought this is an interesting slide here. It's interesting to see. We've got 4 workplaces in the office now. Don't ask me to list them off because I can't remember. Gen Z, millennial, boomer, something else? Anyone want to have a go?
No
I
idea.
don't, all I
Opportunity.
can say for sure is we're all sitting safely in that left-hand column for now. Work-life balance across the board has is the number one priority for candidates, and you can see there that pay plays a role with the younger audience and indeed with the 45 to 54-year-olds, whereas flexibility is more important towards the end of your career, and they're somewhere in the middle. I mean, we could kind of unpack each and every point in here, but James wanted to ask, was there anything in here that kind of stood out? And yeah, what sort of conversations are you having around like generational workplace management? Because we do have 4 very different perspectives operating in the office, and that can bring unique challenges to a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, it's my observation that 45, age 45 plus, and maybe a little bit younger, generally have a greater desire to be in the office than the younger generation. Perhaps it's habit formed from pre-COVID life or work life, but there's generally a desire, and actually they're probably, you know, the people that benefit the least from being in the office. That they know their jobs, they know what they're doing. But we've definitely seen a kind of trend of that 18 to 34 year really pushing for hybrid work, despite being the ones that perhaps would benefit the most from the training and the mentorship, from being in office. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a generation emerge now into the workplace that, started their careers during the pandemic, so have only really known a fully remote or hybrid working model. So the idea of working in the office 5 days a week can be a bit of a shock horror to many. So yeah, perhaps not super surprising to see that, and maybe that will neutralize in the coming years. But yeah, Alistair, what did you think of all this?
Yeah, I think it made for really interesting reading and kind of roughly follows what you might expect. The younger generations potentially wanting to spend more time working from home. Um, the pay increase being higher up for those earliest in their career. You've got the most debt you probably ever had just coming out of college, and you want to kind of pay it off as quickly as possible. So yeah, it kind of follows what I think we hear and see when having discussions with people. Um, but it's great to have it kind of validated in all of this data. I think the one interesting point which isn't covered here, which I think we might go on to talk about in later in the year, is how the benefits packages are needing to be tailored for this kind of 4 generations within one workplace. I think firms are recognizing the need that um, the benefits you might offer somebody who's in their 20s would be different to somebody who is in their 50s and beyond. So there's also discussions to be had around the generational workplace and how everybody works together. Aside from all of this data around kind of preferences and salary.
I think it's really interesting, the salary data here, how the salary from 35 to 44 isn't very different from the salary to 55 plus. In architecture, you typically reach that level where and then there's clearly a ceiling. And I wonder if there's what firms can do to kind of create more roles, more seniority, higher pay, because it's kind of fascinating how different that is from 18 to 34 to 35 to 44 is a huge jump.
Yeah.
And then it kind of was 66% jump, and then it goes barely 5%. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. For me, I found the job satisfaction and the salary satisfaction particularly interesting. This is conversations I've had with candidates here in the UK. They come out of architecture school, wide-eyed and ready to go, and then kind of get completely demoralized by an area schedule, and think they've made a terrible decision and you wasted 7 years of their life and a whole bunch of money on school. So um, we speak to candidates like that all the time, and often it's trying to encourage them that stick it out and things will get better. And you can actually see here job satisfaction. I mean, it goes up with age, and so does salary satisfaction. I think architecture, I mean, it's obviously notoriously it rewards those who are patient. You see, seeing a project go from concept to completion can take years and years. So it can be the same with finding some satisfaction in your career, and that's not to say that you have to stick it out and that if you're miserable just kind of roll up your sleeves. It's just to show you the data here that those who do often feel rewarded. But a great thing about an architecture degree, or again with interior design, there's lots of opportunities beyond just that field. And we're on to the last slide now, the Wellbeing Index. We asked a lot of questions around job satisfaction, salary satisfaction, which we've already touched on, but we also dove into career path satisfaction. How valued do you feel? How manageable is your workload, mental health support, overtime frequency, and annual leave usage? We sort of amalgamated all of those responses, and we sort of put them on a weighted scale, which we're now calling the Wellbeing Index. Gives you a picture of how people are feeling in their roles, and workplace well-being is obviously a really hot topic, and we tried to find a way to quantify that. So you can see Texas there again, just leading the charge. But James, have you had a chance to kind of look at this in detail, and was there anything that stood out here? Does it surprise you that Texas is again so high on the list?
Honestly, it doesn't. I've lived in Australia. I've lived in the UK, and the quality of life in Texas is very high. And it really doesn't surprise me. It feels like people are well supported. It feels like there's perhaps less of that kind of late night work culture that might be present in London and New York. So it doesn't surprise me. I think it's great, but it really doesn't surprise me. And actually, we see a lot of we get a lot of candidates approach us from both the East Coast and the West Coast of the US, looking to come to Texas, and that kind of quality of life, and lack of state tax, and your dollar going further, is a big part of that.
Alistair, one number there that sticks out to me is in the career path satisfaction column, California sitting at plus 99, which is pretty significant. It shows that Californians are pretty satisfied with their decision to enter the architecture or design industry, especially when you see the numbers there in New York at negative 15. What do you think? What do you think that's all about?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I struggle to kind of put my finger on exactly what it might be. There's definitely a kind of cultural difference between the two places. California's just generally being brighter and more optimistic. New York is maybe slightly more pessimistic. It can't all be down to that, I'm sure, but I think New York is a hustle. There's it's an intense place to live and work. California, there is a lot more of a relaxed lifestyle, which potentially leads into more satisfaction, not just in the kind of career path that you mentioned, but all the other aspects. But it was very, very interesting to read how people were satisfied with their career path and their choice.
Well, I suppose California is also notorious for being a very creative state, so it perhaps doesn't surprise that the creative people are satisfied in their creative careers. Could be another factor, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, we could go through this in more detail, but maybe I'll just direct the listener to download the report. You can do so at bespokecareers.com, and you can unpack this. Alistair and James will be more than happy to take your questions if you want to phone in and ask for any more information on this. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. That's a wrap on the architecture and design report in the US. Perhaps just a quick word on Bespoke Careers and what a employer can expect when they pick up the phone and dial us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you might have gathered by now, we're a specialist architecture and design recruiting company. A lot of our employees are ex-architects and designers, so we have a real understanding of the industry. And you'll have access to a huge pool of talent that's been developed over the last 21 years, and a dedicated resource. We'll interview the candidates. We can Revit test the candidates, and you'll have access to candidates you wouldn't otherwise have.
Cool.